That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The desert wind cut through the empty lots of Eldridge, Arizona, carrying the faint tang of sagebrush and diesel from the highway beyond. It was the kind of December dawn that hung low and grey. The sun, a reluctant smear on the horizon, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Jack Harlan pulled his faded denim jacket tighter around his shoulders, the leather patches from his Iron Hawk's vest worn thin from years of riding. His boots crunched on the frost-kissed gravel as he walked toward the community center, his daughter Lily clutching his hand. She was 6, small for her age, with eyes like polished obsidian that caught every flicker of light. Her red mittens swung loose, one thumb already frayed from too many anxious twists. They'd rolled into Eldridge 2 days ago, the Iron Hawk's chapter, stopping for repairs on Jack's old Harley after a blown gasket 20 miles out. The club wasn't much. 8 riders strong, a loose brotherhood of men who'd traded 9 to 5s for the open road, chasing horizons that never quite delivered. Jack had joined after his wife left, taking the stability he'd scraped together in a Phoenix machine shop. Now it was just him and Lily, her laughter the only engine that still revved true in his chest. The center was hosting a Santa event, free photos and hot cocoa for the locals. The sort of small-town ritual that felt like a lifeline in a place where outsiders were eyed like storm clouds. The line snaked around the building, families bundled against the chill, their breaths mingling in white plumes. Jack spotted the Iron Hawk's bikes parked at the edge of the lot, chrome dulled by road dust, engines long since cooled to silence. His brothers were inside already, volunteering to play elves or haul in the tree, quiet acts that kept the club's reputation from tipping fully into the shadows. Lily tugged at his sleeve, her voice a whisper against the murmur of the crowd. "Daddy, will Santa know I want the book about horses? The one with the pictures?" He knelt, the cold seeping through his jeans, and brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. "He'll know, kiddo. Santa's got a way of hearing the good stuff." Her smile was tentative, the kind that came after too many nights in motel rooms with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Jack straightened, his hand finding the small of her back, guiding her into line. The air smelled of pine from the wreaths on the doors and the faint, acrid bite of exhaust from a late-arriving truck. Ahead, the line shuffled slowly, parents chatting in low tones about school plays and holiday shifts. Jack kept his eyes on Lily, watching her bounce on her toes, the excitement pulling her small frame upright. He hadn't planned on this. Holidays on the road were usually just a thermos of coffee and a wrapped candy bar from the gas station. But Eldridge had drawn them in, the mechanic at the garage mentioning the event like it was the town's beating heart. For once, Jack wanted normalcy, a snapshot to tuck into Lily's memories. A ripple moved through the crowd, voices rising in a murmur that carried like distant thunder. Jack craned his neck, seeing the disruption at the front. A man in a tailored wool coat, silver cufflinks glinting under the weak sun, had stepped out of a black SUV with tinted windows. He was broad-shouldered, his face set in the hard lines of someone used to parting crowds. Harlan Blackwood. The name floated back to Jack from a faded newspaper clipping in the diner's window. Local billionaire, owner of half the mines dotting the desert. A man whose empire was built on the backs of towns like this one. He bypassed the line entirely, his driver holding a squirming boy of about 4, the child's face streaked with impatience. The event organizer, a harried woman with a name tag reading Marge, hesitated at the door, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Blackwood's voice cut through, smooth but edged with expectation. "We're in a hurry. Photos, then we're gone. Marge glanced at the line, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she nodded, waving them through. A few murmurs followed, the kind that spoke of resentment, long simmered. Jack felt it too, a quiet tightening in his gut, but he said nothing, his focus on Lily's widening eyes. As Blackwood's group vanished inside, the line surged forward, but the mood had shifted. An older man ahead grumbled about big shots thinking the rules don't apply, his words hanging in the crisp air. Jack squeezed Lily's hand, feeling the tremor in her small fingers. She didn't complain, but her bounce had faded, her gaze fixed on the door as if willing time to bend. Inside, the community center smelled of cinnamon and fresh-cut fur, the lights strung across the ceiling casting a warm glow that pushed back the morning's chill. The Santa setup was makeshift, a throne of red velvet on a plywood stage, flanked by a lopsided tree heavy with ornaments. Volunteers in green felt hats milled about, handing out candy canes. Jack's brother-in-arms, Thomas, caught his eye from across the room, his beard dusted with glitter from helping with props. Thomas nodded, a silent check-in, the kind that bound them without words. They waited, the line inching along, Lily's questions filling the pauses, about reindeer, about snow that never fell in the desert. Jack answered softly, his voice rough from the road's constant wind, but steady for her. When their turn came, he lifted her onto his hip, her weight a familiar anchor, and approached the stage. Santa, played by old Ruiz, another hawk with a belly earned from diner pie and a laugh that rumbled like a V-twin, was mid-ho-ho-ho when the side door banged open. Blackwood's entourage re-emerged, the billionaire already checking his watch, his son clutching a hastily wrapped gift. But the path was blocked. Families had filled the space, and Marge was directing the flow. Blackwood's face darkened, his driver pushing forward to clear a way. It happened fast, a shoulder check deliberate as the driver jostled past Jack and Lily. Jack stumbled, his boot catching on the edge of a rug, and Lily slipped from his arms. She hit the floor with a soft thud, her cry sharp and piercing, cutting through the holiday chatter like a blade. Jack dropped to one knee, scooping her up, her knee scraped red, tears welling in those dark eyes. The room hushed, all eyes turning. Blackwood paused, his expression flickering, annoyance, perhaps a shadow of something else, before he turned away, striding toward the exit. The driver muttered an apology that landed flat, like exhaust in still air. Jack held Lily close, her small body shaking against his chest, the metallic scent of her minor wound mixing with the room's sweetness. Ruiz, still in the Santa suit, rose from his throne, his eyes locking on the scene. The old man's face, lined from years under the sun and scars from roads less traveled, held a quiet fire. In that moment, as the door swung shut behind the billionaire, something shifted in the air, a hush deeper than before, the weight of unspoken lines being drawn. Jack rocked Lily gently, his jaw tight, the Brotherhood's code whispering in the back of his mind, protect what matters, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, as if the desert itself was listening. The community center's warmth lingered on Jack's skin as he carried Lily outside, her sniffles muffled against his neck. The door creaked shut behind them, sealing in the echoes of holiday cheer that now felt hollow. The parking lot stretched empty under the climbing sun, the Ironhawk's bikes lined up like sentinels, their handlebars beaded with melting frost. Jack eased Lily into the passenger seat of the club's battered pickup, the one they used for hauling parts and stragglers, her small legs dangling, the scrape on her knee already crusting over. He rummaged in the glove box for a clean rag and a half-empty bottle of water, dabbing gently at the wound. Her eyes, red-rimmed, fixed on him with that quiet trust that twisted something deep in his chest. "It's okay, kiddo," he murmured, his voice low, the words more for himself than her. The desert air nipped at his ears, carrying the distant whine of a semi on the highway. Eldridge wasn't much, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings hugging the interstate, sustained by the mines that chewed through the earth like a slow hunger. The Hawks had pulled off here out of necessity, but Jack sensed the pull of something more, the way small towns clung to rituals like this Santa event, weaving fragile nets against the isolation. He glanced back at the center, where Ruiz was probably shedding the Santa beard, his broad frame moving with the deliberate care of a man who'd seen too many falls. Lily wiped her nose with the back of her mitten, her voice small. "Why did that man push us, Daddy? We were just waiting." Jack paused, the rag hovering, his thumb brushing her cheek. He wanted to shield her from the world's sharp edges, but lies sat heavy on his tongue. "Some folks are in a rush, Lil. They forget to look where they're going." She nodded, accepting it like she accepted the motels and the endless miles. But her fingers twisted the rag's edge, a telltale sign of the questions brewing beneath. They drove the short stretch to the garage on the town's edge, the pickup's tires humming over cracked asphalt patched with tar that gleamed like old wounds. The Iron Hawk's temporary camp was set up in the lot behind, tents pitched against the chain-link fence, a fire pit ringed with cinder blocks where the morning coffee brewed. Thomas was there, wiping grease from his hands on a rag that had seen better days, his eyes sharpening as Jack pulled up. He was the club's quiet anchor, a former mechanic from Tulsa who'd lost his leg below the knee to a factory mishap, trading resentment for the road's unforgiving freedom. "Heard about the tumble," Thomas said, leaning against the truck's hood, his gaze flicking to Lily. No questions, just the steady offer of a hand to help her down. Inside the garage, the air hung thick with the scent of motor oil and rubber, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. Old man Hargrove, the owner, nodded from behind the counter, his face a map of wrinkles earned from decades tuning engines that never quite quit. He'd cut the Hawks a deal on the repairs. Jack's Harley still up on the lift, its side panel peeled back like exposed bone, because, as he put it, road folk know the value of a fair turn. Lily settled on a stool by the workbench, swinging her legs, while Jack filled Thomas in, his words measured, the anger simmering low like embers under ash. "Blackwood's boy," Thomas grunted, glancing out the grimy window toward the mine road, where dust clouds marked the endless haul of ore trucks. "Owns the town, or thinks he does. Folks here whisper about how he pushed out half the families when the expansion hit, evictions wrapped in pink slips." He handed Lily a candy from his pocket, a butterscotch that unwrapped with a crinkle. Her thanks a soft murmur that eased the tension a fraction. Tomas had a way with kids, his prosthetic leg a silent lesson in getting back up, and Lily leaned toward him, asking about the spark plugs scattered on the bench like puzzle pieces. Across the lot, the diner glowed under its neon sign. Eldridge Eats, the E flickering like a hesitant heartbeat. Jack took Lily there for lunch, the bell above the door jingling as they entered. The place was a time capsule, vinyl booths cracked at the seams, a jukebox in the corner silent since the 80s. The air laced with frying onions and percolating coffee. Waitress Carla moved between tables, her apron stained from spills, her smile weary but genuine. She was a single mum herself, 2 boys in tow, scraping by on tips and the occasional overtime at the mine office. "Usual?" she asked Jack, pouring water without waiting, her eyes lingering on Lily's knee. "What happened there?" Jack shrugged. Sliding into a booth by the window, the glass fogged from the heat inside. Crowd got tight at the center. Carla set down menus, her hand pausing on the table, calluses rough from years of balancing trays. She'd served the Hawks since they arrived, slipping extra fries onto plates without fanfare, the kind of quiet solidarity that bound strangers in places like this. "Heard it was that Blackwood fella," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls might carry tales. "Pushes his way everywhere. Last year he shut down the Little League field for his son's private party, left the kids with nowhere to play. Her voice held no venom, just the ache of someone who'd watched dreams deferred one eviction at a time. Lily coloured on the placemat with a borrowed crayon, horses taking shape under her careful strokes, while Jack sipped his coffee, black and bitter. The diner hummed with locals, miners in coveralls, nursing mugs, a mechanic from Hargrove's trading shifts for stories. Conversation flowed in fragments, complaints about rising rents, the mine's latest layoffs. The way Blackwood's SUV prowled the streets like it owned the shadows. Jack listened, the pieces fitting into the puzzle of Eldridge, a town fraying at the edges, its people navigating moral tightropes between survival and principle. He'd seen it before, in dusty stops from Nevada to New Mexico, where the road revealed the undercurrents of quiet desperation. As Carla refilled his cup, her eyes met his, a shared understanding passing in the steam rising from the porcelain. "You sticking around after the repairs?" she asked, wiping the table with a cloth that smelled faintly of bleach. Jack nodded, thinking of Lily's drawing, the way her horses galloped free on paper. "Couple days, long enough to set things right." She smiled faintly, pocketing her tip jar's change, and moved on to the next table, her steps measured against the linoleum's wear. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the empty road that led to the mines. Jack paid the bill, Lily's hand in his as they stepped into the light, the desert wind whispering through the sagebrush. Back at the garage, Ruiz was waiting, the Santa suit traded for his leathers, his face etched with the resolve of a man who'd chosen his battles wisely. He clapped Jack on the shoulder, the gesture heavy with unspoken promise. "We look out for our own," he said simply, his eyes drifting to Lily, who clutched her drawing like a talisman. The day wore on in the garage's rhythm, tools clinking, engines coughing to life under Thomas's hands. The Brotherhood's quiet vigil against the encroaching dusk. Jack watched Lily play in the lot, her laughter chasing dust motes, but his mind turned to the center, to Blackwood's retreating back. The incident lingered like oil on water, a thin film separating the ordinary from what might come next. In Eldridge, under the vast sky, small acts rippled outward, drawing lines in the sand that no amount of wealth could erase. As the sun dipped, painting the horizon in bruised purples, Jack felt the weight of it all. The road's endless pull, the fragile bonds holding them together, and the moral current building beneath the surface calm. The evening settled over Eldridge like a heavy blanket, the desert sky deepening to indigo, stars pricking through the haze of distant mine lights. Jack sat on a folding chair by the fire pit behind the garage, the flames crackling softly, casting flickering shadows on the chain-link fence. Lily was tucked into a sleeping bag inside the club's main tent, her breathing even, the day's scrape forgotten in the rhythm of exhaustion. The Iron Hawks gathered loosely around the fire, Thomas stoking the logs with a poker, Ruiz nursing a thermos of coffee that steamed in the chill, and a couple of others, Mick and Lena, who'd ridden in from the highway with fresh parts. Lena was one of the few women in the chapter, her hair cropped short under a bandana, her hands scarred from years welding frames in a shop that had gone under. The air carried the scent of burning mesquite, sharp and earthy, mingling with the faint metallic tang from the garage doors left ajar. Jack stared into the flames, his fingers tracing the frayed edge of his vest, the Iron Hawk's patch, a stylized bird in flight, worn soft from countless washes. The day's events replayed in fragments, Lily's cry, the indifferent stride of Blackwood's driver, the hush in the community center. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't chased after them, that wasn't the way. But the knot in his gut tightened with each passing hour, a quiet storm building behind the calm. Ruiz broke the silence first, his voice gravelly from the Santa beard's itch. "Town's buzzing about it already." Marge from the center called Hargrove, said folks are whispering that we started something, that the Hawks pushed back too hard. He chuckled low, but there was no humor in it, just the weariness of explanations long overdue. Jack nodded, poking at the fire with a stick, sparks rising like fleeting prayers. Eldridge, like so many stops, saw the leathers and the bikes and assumed the worst. Outlaws rolling in to disrupt the fragile peace, hearts as hard as the desert rock. They'd heard the murmurs at the diner, the sidelong glances from locals who crossed the street when the engines rumbled to life. Mick leaned forward, his face illuminated in oranges and reds, a tattoo of coiled rope snaking up his forearm, a reminder of his days on oil rigs before the sea called him inland. Saw it in the eyes of those parents today. Thought we'd turn the place upside down over a kid's tumble. Like we ain't got our own scars. He paused, rubbing his jaw, the stubble rasping under his palm. Mick had lost a brother to a bar fight years back, the kind that escalated from words to regret, and it had pulled him to the Hawks for the code that valued restraint over retaliation. They weren't saints, but they weren't the monsters the headlines painted. Men on the margins, yes, but ones who patched roads and shared meals with strangers who needed it most. Lena added a log to the fire, her movements deliberate, the wood hissing as sap bubbled. She joined after her husband walked out, leaving her with debts and a garage full of half-finished bikes. Carla at the diner gets it. Slipped me a note with the check. Said Blackwood's been leaning on the center for donations that never come. Folks here are scared to speak up, think it'll cost them a shift at the mine. Her eyes met Jack's across the flames, a shared flicker of understanding. In places like this, the bikers were easy targets, visible, nomadic, a convenient shadow to cast blame on, while the real weights pressed from boardrooms and bank ledgers. But layer by layer, the truth peeled back. Tomas teaching Lily to tighten a bolt that afternoon, his patience endless as he explained the give and take of metal under strain. Ruiz lingering at the center to help pack away the Santa props, his large hands gentle with the fragile ornaments. Jack's breath came slow, the fire's heat warming one side of his face while the night air nipped at the other. He thought of Lily inside, her small form curled around the horse book he'd promised Santa would deliver. The road had taught him silence as a shield, but tonight it felt like a cage. "They see the vests, not the why," he said finally, his voice barely above the fire's pop. "We ride because staying still breaks you, but pushing a kid, that's not hurry. That's carelessness with power." The words hung there, heavy, drawing nods from the circle. The Hawks weren't vigilantes, their justice was quieter, woven into acts like towing a stranded family van, or standing watch during a storm that flooded the motel's low spots. Across the lot, the diner's neon hummed faintly, a beacon in the gathering dark. Carla had mentioned earlier, over a second cup of coffee she'd comped, how the town judged quick, bikers as trouble, Blackwood as untouchable. But she'd seen the Hawks help load groceries for an elderly couple last week, no fanfare, just the rumble of bikes fading into the dusk. "You all remind folks there's still good under the grit," she'd said, her hand lingering on the pot's handle, steam curling like unspoken hopes. Jack had felt a pull then, the moral thread tightening, protect the vulnerable, even if it meant facing the town's wary eyes. As the fire died to embers, Ruiz stood, stretching his back with a soft groan. "Tomorrow, we finish the repairs. Then we see about setting things straight. No grand plans, just the steady resolve that bound them." Jack rose too, the chair scraping gravel, and glanced toward the tent where Lily slept. The desert wind sighed through the sagebrush, carrying the distant low of engines on the highway, reminders that the road waited, but so did the unfinished business of the day. In Eldridge's quiet margins, judgments formed and fractured, revealing hearts that beat beneath the leather and dust. The night deepened, the stars indifferent witnesses as the Brotherhood settled into watch, their loyalty a silent flame against the cold. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The morning light filtered through the garage's half-open doors, painting the concrete floor in pale stripes, the air still thick with the night's chill and the faint char of last night's fire. Jack woke to the soft patter of Lily's feet on the gravel outside the tent, her voice calling out to Thomas as he tinkered with a carburetor under the pickup's hood. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the stubble on his jaw rasping against his palm, and stepped out into the crisp dawn. The desert stretched beyond the fence, sagebrush swaying in a breeze that carried the low rumble of an approaching truck, another load from the mines, no doubt. Grinding the earth for Blackwood's fortune, Lily ran to him, her drawing from the diner clutched in one hand, the horses on it smudged from overnight folds. "Thomas says we can help fix Daddy's bike today," she said, her eyes bright, despite the faint shadow under them from yesterday's upset. Jack knelt, pulling her into a hug that smelled of her shampoo. Strawberry. A rare splurge from a truck stop in Utah. The scrape on her knee was a pink line now, healing under the rag's gentle care, but the memory of her fall lingered in his tightened grip. "Sounds like a plan," he murmured, his breath visible in the cold. He straightened, scanning the lot where the Hawk stirred, Mick coiling ropes by the fire pit, Lena brewing coffee over a portable stove, the aroma cutting through the oil and metal scents like a promise of normalcy. Hargrove shuffled out from the office, his keys jingling, and tossed Jack a nod. "Harley's ready for a test run, gaskets holding." The old man had stayed late the night before, his hands steady on the tools, sharing stories of his own road days, lost loves and busted engines that taught more than any map. In Eldridge, trust built slow like rust on exposed iron, but the Hawk's quiet work had chipped at it. Jack wheeled the bike out, the tires crunching gravel, Lily trailing with wide eyes as he kicked it to life. The engine roared, a deep vibration that settled into his bones, chasing away the night's unrest. He rode a short loop around the lot, the wind whipping his jacket, testing the pull. Smooth now. Reliable. Lily clapped as he cut the motor, her laughter a brief spark against the morning's weight. By midday, the town stirred fully, the highway feeding in locals for errands and the occasional tourist chasing Route 66 ghosts. Jack took Lily to the community center again, not for photos this time, but to help Marge pack away the leftover decorations, boxes of tinsel and lights that needed sorting for next year. The Hawks had offered without asking, Thomas hauling crates with his one good leg braced firm, Ruiz directing with the same calm he'd used in the Santa suit. Inside, the space felt emptier, the stage bare, echoes bouncing off the walls like unanswered questions. Marge wiped her brow, her clipboard tucked under her arm, and shot Jack a grateful look. Didn't expect help from, well, you all. After yesterday. Her words trailed, laced with the town's habitual caution, the assumption that leather vests hid fists more than hearts. Jack shrugged, stacking chairs with deliberate care, the metal cool under his palms. "No one's counting scores here." Lily helped fold tablecloths, her small hands smoothing wrinkles, while Carla dropped by with sandwiches from the diner. Ham on rye, wrapped in wax paper that crinkled softly. She'd heard about the push from half a dozen patrons, the story twisting in retellings. Bikers causing a scene, Blackwood just being Blackwood, but Carla's eyes held no judgment, only the quiet alliance of those raising kids on scraps. "Lily's a trooper," she said, kneeling to hand the girl a cookie, their fingers brushing in a moment of shared warmth. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wreaths still hanging crooked on the doors, as if the desert was stirring secrets from the sand. The shift came unannounced, like a shadow lengthening at noon. Blackwood's SUV pulled into the lot, tires crunching to a halt near the entrance. The engine's hum cutting off with a decisive click. The billionaire stepped out, his wool coat unbuttoned against the mild sun, his son trailing with a toy truck clutched tight. He was heading for Marge's office, no doubt to discuss the donation Carla had mentioned, the one that bought silence more than goodwill. Jack paused mid-lift, his muscles tensing, the chair legs scraping faintly. Lily froze beside him, her eyes darting to the window, the cookie forgotten in her hand. Ruiz noticed first, his broad frame straightening from a box of ornaments, the glass beads inside shifting with a soft clink. He moved to the door, not blocking, just present, his leathers creaking faintly. Blackwood's gaze flicked over him, dismissing the Santa from yesterday as just another volunteer. But Ruiz's voice carried clear and steady when the man brushed past. "Mr. Blackwood, a word?" It wasn't a demand, more a pause in the air, heavy as the dust settling on the lot. The billionaire halted, his driver hovering by the SUV, hand on the door like it might shield him from conversation. Blackwood turned, his expression a mask of controlled impatience, lines etching deeper around his mouth. "Make it quick. I have meetings." Ruiz nodded, stepping closer, his eyes level, the fire from the center yesterday now a controlled burn. "Saw what happened to the girl. My girl, in a way. All kids are, in a place like this." He gestured vaguely toward Lily, who peeked from behind Jack's leg, her breathing shallow. The room held its breath. Marge frozen by the desk. Thomas setting down a crate with deliberate slowness. Blackwood's jaw tightened, a flicker crossing his face. Not anger, but something raw, like recognition of a mirror held too close. "It was an accident," Blackwood said, his voice low, the words clipped as if admitting fault cost currency. But Ruiz pressed gently, his hand open, palm up. "Accidents happen when we're not watching. But watching, that's what keeps a town whole. Your boys got that truck, my friend's girl wanted a book, small things, but they matter." The silence stretched, the wind outside whistling through the eaves, carrying the faint scent of pine from the discarded tree. Blackwood glanced at his son, the boy's eyes wide, then back to Ruiz. The weight of unspoken histories pressing in, the minds that displaced families, the donations that demanded loyalty over truth. For a moment, the billionaire's shoulders sagged, just a fraction, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, the silver cufflink catching the light. "I'll look into it," he muttered, the admission hanging like exhaust in still air. He turned away, guiding his son back to the SUV, but the pause lingered, a crack in the armor. As the vehicle pulled out, gravel spraying lightly, Ruiz exhaled, his breath strained, and met Jack's gaze across the room. No triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of a line held, compassion threading through the strength. The center emptied slowly after that, boxes sealed, the air settling into a tentative peace. Jack carried Lily out, her head on his shoulder, the cookie crumbs dusting his vest. The sun climbed higher, warming the asphalt, but the encounter rippled outward, a small act, defending without fists, activating the code that bound them. In Eldridge's frayed edges, judgments began to shift, layer by layer, as the desert wind whispered of changes yet to come. The afternoon sun beat down on Eldridge's cracked streets, turning the asphalt into a shimmering haze that blurred the line between road and sky. Jack guided Lily back to the garage, her small hand warm in his, despite the chill that still clung to the shadows. The encounter at the center replayed in his mind, the way Blackwood's eyes had flickered, not with rage, but with something unguarded, like a man glimpsing his own reflection in cracked glass. Ruiz's words had hung in the air, simple and unyielding, activating that deep code of the Hawks. No one hurts those we protect, not without consequence. But consequence, Jack knew, came in whispers before it roared. They arrived at the lot as the mechanic's tools clattered to a halt for lunch. The garage doors yawning open to release a puff of warm, oil-scented air. Thomas was under the pickup again, his wrench scraping rhythmically against bolts, sweat beading on his forehead despite the season. He straightened as they approached, wiping his hands on his jeans, the prosthetic leg shifting with a faint metallic click. "Heard Ruiz had words," he said quietly, his gaze sliding to Lily, who had wandered to the fire pit to poke at the cold ashes with a stick. No details needed. The Brotherhood communicated in glances and half-sentences, the weight of the morning understood without elaboration. Jack nodded, leaning against the truck's fender, the metal warm under his palm. Didn't push, just reminded him. Thomas grunted, offering a rag to clean Lily's dusty fingers when she returned, her stick abandoned. The girl accepted it with a shy smile, twisting the fabric as she watched a hawk circle overhead, its shadow fleeting across the gravel. Jack felt the tension coiling in his chest, a slow burn fed by the road's lessons. Power like Blackwood's didn't yield easily. It pushed back, often through proxies, testing the margins where men like them lived. Word spread through Eldridge like dust on the wind. By early evening, as the Hawks gathered scraps for a communal meal, cans of chili heated over the revived fire pit, the diner's phone had rung twice at the garage. Hargrove relayed the calls with a furrowed brow, his voice low over the sizzle of onions in a skillet. "Marge says the center's board is jittery. Blackwood's assistant dropped by after you left, asking questions about disruptions during the event. Mentioned pulling funding if things get messy." He stirred the pot, the steam rising in lazy curls, carrying the spice of cumin that cut through the desert's dry bite. Jack's jaw tightened, his fingers pausing on the knife as he sliced bread from a loaf Carla had sent over, wrapped in foil that still held the oven's warmth. The board, locals who'd volunteered their evenings for the town's rituals, now faced a choice. Side with the billionaire's shadow or risk the lights going dim on next year's Santa. It was the kind of moral suspense that frayed communities, pitting survival against spine. Lily sat nearby, colouring on the hood of the pickup with crayons Thomas had scavenged, her horses now joined by a crude Santa, beard like swirling clouds. She hummed softly, oblivious, but Jack caught her glance toward the road, where Blackwood's mine trucks rumbled past in the distance, their headlights piercing the twilight like accusatory eyes. Ruiz arrived as the food was portioned out on paper plates, his leathers dusted from a solo ride to clear his head. He settled by the fire, accepting a bowl with a nod, the flames reflecting in his eyes like embers of resolve. "He's not done," Ruiz said after a long pause, his spoon scraping the bowl's edge. The group listened, the crackle of wood underscoring his words. Mick shifted on his crate, arms crossed, the rope tattoo flexing with the motion. Lena poured coffee, black and steaming, her bandana tied back, revealing a faint scar along her temple from a spill years ago. "Town's splitting already," Carla called. "Says some miners are whispering we provoked him, that outsiders stirring trouble will cost jobs." The air grew heavier. The desert wind, picking up to rattle the fence, carrying the faint howl of coyotes from the hills. Jack ate slowly, the chili's heat doing little to ease the strain in his throat. He'd seen this escalation before, in border towns where a single slight snowballed into evictions or worse, the powerful using leverage like a club to silence ripples. His own past flickered at the edges. The wife who'd left not for another man, but for the stability he couldn't chain down. The garage job traded for the road after one too many layoffs from bosses like Blackwood. Loyalty to the Hawks had filled the void, but now it pulled him into Eldridge's undercurrents, the moral conflict sharpening like a blade on whetstone. Lily yawned, her crayon pausing mid-stroke, and Jack lifted her onto his lap, her weight a grounding force against the rising tide. "Daddy, is Santa mad at the man?" she asked, her voice small, eyes searching his face in the firelight. He hesitated, the question piercing deeper than intended, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed her hair back. Strained breathing filled the pause, his own chest tight with the effort to shield her. "Santa's not mad, kiddo. He just wants everyone to see what's right. She nestled closer, the scent of her hair mingling with smoke, but the innocence in her trust amplified the stakes, the vulnerable drawing fire without knowing. As night deepened, the conversation turned inward, voices low against the stars. Thomas spoke of his factory days, the accident that took his leg not from machinery, but from a corner cut for profit, echoing Blackwood's empire. Ruiz added fragments of his service overseas, the quiet pacts among soldiers that mirrored the Hawk's code. Compassion forged in silence, justice beyond badges. Jack listened, the fire's glow warming his skin, while cold doubt gnawed inside. Retaliation tempted, a controlled rage bubbling under the calm. But the Brotherhood's strength lay in restraint, in defending without destroying. A distant engine growl broke the reverie, headlights sweeping the lot, not the SUV, but a local cop car, its blues flickering like a warning. The officer stepped out, badge glinting, hat tipped against the wind. "Evening, folks. Got a call about disturbances at the center. Mind if I ask a few questions?" His tone was even, but the undercurrent was clear. Blackwood's influence, testing the waters. Ruiz rose slowly, hands visible, the group still as statues. Jack held Lily tighter, her breathing steady in sleep now, the moral suspense thickening the air like fog rolling off the highway. The questions came measured, details of the push. The words exchanged, the cop's notebook filling with scribbles under the fire's light. No accusations, but the implication hung. Outsiders complicating things for a town already on edge. As the cruiser pulled away, taillights fading into the dark, the Hawks exchanged looks, the tension escalating into something tangible, a storm front building. Jack rocked Lily gently, the night's chill seeping through his jacket, the weight of unspoken guilt and loyalty pressing heavier. In Eldridge's margins, the lines blurred further, compassion clashing with the cost of standing firm, as the desert whispered of revelations yet to surface. The cop's tail lights dissolved into the night, leaving the fire pit's embers to pulse like a fading heartbeat against the encroaching dark. Jack shifted Lily's sleeping form in his arms, her cheek warm against his shoulder, the faint rhythm of her breath, a fragile anchor amid the settling dust. The Hawks remained seated, the air thick with the scent of cooling chili and mesquite smoke, their silence a shared exhale after the intruder's probe. Ruiz sank back onto his crate, his broad hands clasping a tin mug, the coffee inside gone cold. No one spoke of storming gates or revving engines in pursuit. That wasn't their rhythm. But the controlled rage simmered, a low vibration in their chests, tempered by the compassion that had drawn them together, the unyielding code to shield without shattering. Thomas broke the hush first, his voice gravel over the fire's dying crackle. "He'll push harder now. Cops don't roll out here for chit-chat unless someone's dialing from a high perch." He adjusted his prosthetic with a subtle shift, the mechanism whispering against denim, a reminder of imbalances long endured. Mick nodded, his rope tattoo catching the ember glow as he tossed a stick into the flames, sparks scattering like unspoken retorts. Lena poured the last of the coffee, her movements precise, steam curling upward to mingle with the desert's chill, carrying hints of bitter earth. Carla texted, "Says the miners' lounge is buzzing." Blackwood spreading word that we're agitators, stirring up the event to shake down donations. Folks are scared. Jobs hang on his nod. Jack felt the words settle like gravel under tires, the moral suspense coiling tighter in his gut. He eased Lily toward the tent, her small body limp with trust, and laid her down on the sleeping bag, tucking the edge over her shoulders. The fabric smelled of road dust and faint lavender from a sachet Lena had sewn, a small ritual against the nomad's grit. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the chain-link fence like distant warnings, the stars above indifferent to the fractures below. He returned to the circle, sinking onto the ground, the cool earth seeping through his jeans. His hands trembled faintly, not from cold, but from the strain of restraint, the pull between unleashing the road's fury and preserving the fragile peace Lily needed. Ruiz met his gaze across the fire, the old man's eyes reflecting the same internal war, lines etched deeper from years of choices that left scars unseen. "We don't bend to shadows," he said softly, his breath visible in the dropping temperature. "But we don't break the innocent either. Tomorrow we talk to the board, straight, no leather, just truth." The plan formed in murmurs, the Brotherhood's loyalty weaving through the tension like threads in a worn vest. They'd seen empires like Blackwood's before, facades of polish over veins of greed, displacing lives for ledgers. Jack's mind drifted to his own hidden fractures. The nights after his wife left, when the empty crib echoed louder than any engine, pulling him to the Hawks for the family they offered without blood ties. Dawn crept in reluctant, the sky a bruised grey, streaked with the promise of sun. Jack woke to Lily's stirring, her dark eyes blinking open to the tent's canvas walls, the faint light filtering through seams like hesitant confessions. She sat up, rubbing her face with small fists, the scrape on her knee a faint pink reminder. "Is the policeman coming back, Daddy?" Her voice was a whisper, laced with the innocence that amplified every shadow. Jack pulled her close, his heart straining against the lie he shaped gently. "No, kiddo. We're just talking today, about making things fair." She nodded, accepting it with a yawn, but her fingers twisted the sleeping bag's edge, a subtle tremor betraying the day's weight seeping into her world. The garage hummed to life as they broke camp, tools clinking like Morse code in the morning hush. Hargrove arrived early, his truck coughing to a stop, face shadowed under his cap. "Board meets at the diner at 10, he said, handing Jack a thermos of coffee, the metal warm from the engine block. "Marge asked me to vouch, said your lot's been square since rolling in." Gratitude flickered in the old man's eyes, a crack in Eldridge's wary shell, born from watching the Hawks mend a neighbor's fence the week before. No charge, just the nod of shared margins. Jack sipped the brew, black and scalding, the bitterness grounding him as Lily sketched on a scrap of cardboard nearby, her horses now galloping toward a distant horizon. The diner filled with the scent of bacon and percolating grounds as the meeting convened, vinyl booths creaking under the weight of locals, miners in faded flannel, Marge with her clipboard, a few wives clutching purses like shields. Carla served coffee rounds, her apron pockets jingling with change, her glances toward Jack laced with quiet solidarity. The Hawks entered subdued, vests draped over arms rather than worn, Ruiz leading with a nod to the group. Blackwood's absence loomed larger than his presence, his influence threading through the air like invisible wire. The board chair, a wiry man named Ellis, with calloused hands from ore sorting, cleared his throat. "Heard complaints, event got rough, kid hurt, now threats to pull support. We can't afford division." Tension thickened, voices overlapping in strained breaths, the moral conflict laid bare, survival clashing with the urge to call out the push that started it all. Jack leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, knuckles whitening subtly. "Wasn't division we brought. It was a man in a hurry who forgot the line matters." Murmurs rippled, some nodding, others shifting uneasily. The room's fluorescent hum underscoring the pause. Ruiz added his piece, voice steady as desert stone. "We've fixed more than bikes here. Helped Carla with her boy's bike chain, towed Hargrove's rig last storm. That's our code. Protect, don't pray." Lily, perched on a stool by the counter, watched with wide eyes. Her crayon paused, the diner's neon buzzing faintly outside like a nervous pulse. Ellis rubbed his chin, the silence stretching, breaths held in collective strain. Then the door swung open, a gust of wind carrying dust and the low growl of an engine. Blackwood's assistant entered, slick suit out of place amid the grease-stained counters, envelope in hand. Mr. Blackwood's terms, event costs covered, but no more incidents with transients. The word landed like a slap, eyes turning to the Hawks, judgment flickering anew. Jack's chest tightened, rage flaring hot and controlled, his fingers curling under the table. Compassion warred within. For the board's fear, for Lily's quiet gaze, for the town teetering on edges they all knew too well, Ruiz stood slowly, his chair scraping softly, the room holding its breath. Tell him incidents start with carelessness and end with choices. The assistant faltered, envelope creasing in his grip before retreating with a curt nod. The diner exhaled, the tension cresting but not breaking, the escalation hanging like rain on asphalt, imminent, inevitable. Jack gathered Lily, her small hand in his, the warmth a tether against the storm. Outside, the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the lot, the desert wind whispering of truths buried deeper, ready to surface and reframe it all. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jack Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. The sun hung low over Eldridge, a bloated orange disk bleeding into the desert horizon, casting the town's edges in elongated shadows that stretched like fingers across the cracked asphalt. Jack stood by the garage's open doors, the air cooling around him, carrying the faint, acrid scent of cooling engines, and the distant tang of sagebrush stirred by the evening breeze. Lily sat on the pickup's tailgate, her legs swinging idly, the cardboard sketch of galloping horses now tucked into her jacket pocket like a secret talisman. The day's meeting at the diner lingered in the quiet, the board's hesitant nods, a fragile bridge over the chasm of fear. Blackwood's assistant had left with his envelope unopened, the words exchanged, hanging unresolved. But something had shifted, a crack in the facade, the first whisper of accountability in a place where power had long dictated silence. Inside the garage, Tomas wiped down tools with methodical strokes, the rag whispering against steel, his prosthetic leg braced steady as he worked. Ruiz leaned against the workbench, his leathers creased from the day's exertions, a thermos of coffee steaming faintly between his hands. The Hawks had dispersed after the diner, giving the town space to breathe, but the Brotherhood's vigil remained, unspoken and unyielding. Jack felt the weight of it in his chest, a slow uncoiling of tension laced with the ache of what might come. The cops' visit, the board's strained faces, the assistant's clipped retreat, they were ripples from the push in the center line, escalating into a moral tide that tested loyalties forged on the road. Lily hopped down, gravel crunching under her boots, and tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Daddy, when do we ride again?" Her voice was soft, edged with the road's rhythm, but her eyes held a new depth, as if the diner's tension had seeped into her dreams. He knelt, the concrete biting through his jeans, and cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing faint dust from her cheeks. "Soon, kiddo, but first we see this through." She nodded, her small hand finding his, the contact a quiet anchor against the gathering dusk. Jack rose, the joint in his knee protesting faintly, a remnant from a spill years back when the road had claimed more than miles, and scanned the lot where the bikes waited, chrome dulled by the day's light, engines silent but humming with potential. Word came as the stars began to prick the sky, delivered by Carla's text to Lena's phone, the screen's glow cutting through the dimness like a hesitant beacon. Blackwood had shown at the center that afternoon, unannounced, his SUV pulling up with the gravel's familiar crunch. No entourage this time, just the man himself, coat slung over one arm, his son's toy truck left behind in the vehicle. He'd spoken to Marge alone, voice low through the office door, the words filtering out in fragments. Regret, a check for the event's costs, an apology for the oversight that led to Lily's fall. Not grand gestures, but real, enough to steady the board's hands, to quiet the whispers of pulled funding. The billionaire had lingered, eyes tracing the empty stage where Santa's throne had stood, as if seeing the scene anew through Ruiz's steady gaze. Jack read the message aloud by the fire pit, the flames newly kindled, their crackle underscoring the revelation that followed. Hargrove, drawn by the light, shuffled over with a faded envelope in hand. One Blackwood had left at the diner, addressed not to the centre, but to Jack Harlan. Inside, a letter on heavy stock, the ink precise but the script betraying a tremor. Blackwood's brother, lost to a mining accident a decade prior, had been a drifter like Jack once, riding with a crew much like the Hawks before settling in Eldridge for work. The push, the indifference, it echoed the man's own buried guilt, the way he'd climbed over such lives to build his empire, never looking back until a child's cry cracked the mirror. I see it now. The letter ended, simple words that reframed the days. The billionaire not as untouchable foe, but a man haunted by margins he'd once walked. His son's impatience, a shadow of his own unchecked haste. The fire popped, sending a spark skyward, and Ruiz exhaled slowly, his breath strained in the chill. "Hidden pasts catch up," he murmured, the Santa's fire in his eyes now a quiet ember of understanding. Thomas nodded, his wrench set aside, the group's silence thick with compassion's weight. Forgiveness not as weakness, but as the road's hard-won mercy. Jack folded the letter, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest, the moral suspense dissolving into a profound release. He'd carried his own ghosts, the wife's departure, the night's questioning if the road robbed Lily of roots. But here, in Eldridge's frayed heart, survival intertwined with second chances, outcasts bridging divides with subtle strength. Lily stirred the embers with a stick, her face illuminated in soft oranges. Oblivious to the letter's depth, but sensing the shift in the air. "Is the man sorry now?" she asked, echoing her earlier innocence, her voice cutting through like dawn's first light. Jack pulled her close, the leather of his vest creaking faintly, his nod a gesture heavy with unspoken loyalty. "Yeah, Lil, sometimes that's how it starts." The Hawks gathered closer, sharing the thermos in turns, the coffee's bitterness a counterpoint to the emerging peace. Carla arrived then, plates of pie from the diner's close in hand, her steps light on the gravel, a smile breaking the day's strain. "Heard he made it right," she said softly, settling beside Lena, the women's shared glance a thread of community woven tighter. As the night deepened, the desert wind sighed through the sagebrush, carrying the highway's distant hum, a reminder that roads led onward, but bonds held firm. Jack watched the flames die to glow, Lily's head heavy on his shoulder, the scrape on her knee now just a faint line, healing like the town's divides. The billionaire's regret, Ruiz's words as Santa, they activated a justice beyond law, compassion inside the leather's grit, defending the vulnerable with silent resolve. Eldridge exhaled, its margins softening under the stars, survival laced with redemption's quiet grace. In the hush of engines cooled and promises kept, the desert remembered, even the hardest paths bend toward light when hearts align. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching. The case of Single Dad was pushed out of the Santa line. The billionaire regretted it when Santa spoke up. See you in the next one.